The person had always lived a quiet life. Each morning, they would wake up early, stretch, and move around their small apartment with gentle care. The apartment was not big, but it was cozy, filled with small touches that showed a life of quiet patience. A few plants rested on the windowsill, reaching for the soft sunlight that spilled in. On one wall stood an old piano, its wood scratched and worn, its keys slightly yellowed with age. It was not a grand instrument, but it had a presence that filled the room with warmth. For years, the piano had been a companion more than a tool. They didn't perform or play for anyone else. Music was a private comfort, a language understood only by the person and the keys. Some days, they would play for hours, letting the fingers move slowly, almost as if they were speaking softly to someone who could not reply. Other days, the piano remained silent, a witness to the quiet rhythms of ordinary life. Life outside the apartment was calm, but sometimes heavy. The person worked in a small office, a job that paid the bills but did not inspire passion. Each day felt similar to the last, a rhythm of small tasks, polite greetings, and the occasional smile. Outside, people hurried along the streets, lost in their own worlds. The person often watched them from the window, thinking about the choices they had made and the ones they had let go. The life was simple. It was not without challenges. There were mornings when the person woke up feeling small, doubting whether their music or dreams mattered at all. There were afternoons when loneliness crept in, a quiet shadow that made the apartment feel too empty. Family lived far away, friends were few, and the world sometimes felt too large and too fast. But in those moments, the piano was always there. Sitting in front of it, the person felt a little stronger, a little braver. Each note played was a step into a world where judgment did not exist, where only the music mattered. Neighbors knew little about the person beyond polite hellos and casual nods. They saw someone walking quietly with groceries, carrying books from the library, or pausing at the corner to watch the sky change color. Few imagined that behind the small apartment door, there was a person who could coax music out of an old piano in ways that could move hearts. Music in that space was a secret magic that belonged to them alone. At night, the apartment became a different kind of quiet. Streetlights painted long shadows across the walls, and the hum of the city softened. The person often lit a small lamp, its soft glow filling the corners of the room. Sitting at the piano, they would play slowly, letting each note linger. Sometimes it was a melody of happiness, gentle and bright. Sometimes it was a tune of sorrow, low and haunting. Each note carried a memory, a feeling, or a thought that words could not express. The piano had been with them through every stage of life. As a child, it had been a gift, something that seemed too big and too important for small hands. Lessons had come and gone, some strict, some gentle. There were moments of frustration when fingers stumbled, when scales felt endless, when the music did not come out as expected. But there were also moments of pure joy, when a melody finally felt right, when the person lost themselves in the sound and time seemed to disappear as the years passed. The piano became less about perfection and more about expression. It became a place to try ideas, to explore feelings, to imagine stories. The person would close their eyes and play, letting the music rise and fall like waves, letting it tell stories they could not say aloud. Each note was deliberate, each pause intentional. The piano was not just wood and strings. It was a friend, a teacher, a mirror, even though the person rarely played for anyone else. There were small moments when the music escaped the apartment. Sometimes a neighbor would hear a soft tune drifting through the hallway and pause in wonder. Other times, the person would hum a melody on the way to the store, catching a note that felt like it belonged to the world outside. Yet, for the most part, the music stayed private. A sanctuary from a world that often felt too loud and too complicated. The person's days were simple, but full of little rituals. Breakfast was always quiet, often a cup of tea with a slice of bread or fruit. The commute to work was slow, measured, a time to think or watch the city unfold. Lunch was often taken at a small cafe, a sandwich eaten while watching people pass by, each absorbed in their own story. And in the evening there was always the return to the piano, where the world's noise faded. and only sound and feeling remained. Though life was ordinary, the person carried within them a quiet hope. It was not a hope of fame or applause, but a hope that one day something would happen that made the world notice. Not for the sake of attention, but because music and the feelings it carried were too important to remain hidden. Each note played in solitude was a rehearsal for a moment they could not yet imagine. A moment that might come unexpectedly and change everything. Friends and colleagues sometimes noticed the spark in their eyes when they talked about music. Even in small, casual conversation, the person's face would light up, their hands gesturing as if conducting an invisible orchestra. Yet, most days, life remained calm, predictable. The piano waited in the corner, patient, as if it knew the right moment would come. In the quiet of one evening, as rain tapped gently on the window, the person sat at the piano and pressed the first key. The sound filled the apartment, soft but clear. Fingers moved carefully at first, testing the notes, feeling the wood beneath them. Then, slowly, the music grew, spreading across the room, filling the corners, pushing against the walls. It was a melody that told a story of patience, of small joys, of quiet courage. It was music that had lived in the shadows for years, waiting to be heard. The person did not know that this night, like many others, was preparing them for something larger. Each practice, each private song, this quiet moment at the piano, had built a reserve of skill and heart that no one else could see. It was the kind of preparation that does not announce itself, that grows unnoticed, until suddenly, the time comes to shine. Outside, the city continued its rhythm. Unaware of the life inside the small apartment, people hurried, cars honked, streetlights flickered. Inside, the piano's song floated like a gentle reminder that beauty exists even in ordinary places, even in quiet, unnoticed lives. And in that music, the person found a sense of purpose, a belief that someday something would happen that would make the world stop and listen as the night deepened. The person played one last piece, slow and thoughtful, a melody that seemed to speak of longing and hope, of memories and dreams. When the final note faded, silence returned, but it was a silence filled with possibility. The piano, patient and steady, waited, and the person, tired but calm, knew that life had more to offer than the routine of days. Something unseen, something extraordinary, was waiting just beyond the horizon, and music would be the key to reaching it. Life continued in its quiet rhythm, the person moving through each day with familiar steps and small routines. But one ordinary morning, something unexpected arrived. It came not with fanfare, but quietly. It's almost as if the world was testing whether they were ready for more than their private music. A local community center had announced a small event, a talent showcase open to anyone. At first, the person barely noticed it, assuming it was for performers more confident, more daring than themselves. They had always shied away from the spotlight, preferring the comfort of their own apartment and the soft conversation with their piano. Yet, the announcement lingered in their thoughts. There was a whisper inside, soft but persistent, asking what it might feel like to share music beyond the walls of the apartment. The idea was thrilling but terrifying. They had never played for a crowd, never faced eyes that could judge or applause that could falter. Doubts crowded in. What if they failed? What if the music that felt alive in private sounded flat or wrong in public? What if people laughed or worse, ignored them? For days, they debated silently, each thought circling like a restless bird. They practiced as usual, their fingers brushing keys with care. Yet each note seemed heavier, each melody shadowed with uncertainty. The piano, which had always been a friend, felt suddenly like a judge, waiting for them to prove themselves. At the same time, a small, steady curiosity refused to go away. Could they actually do it? Could the music that lived quietly in their apartment find a voice outside? The first step came unexpectedly. A friend, someone who had noticed the quiet spark in the person's eyes when they spoke about music, casually mentioned the showcase during a morning walk. Their words were simple, almost offhand, but they carried encouragement. "I think people would really love to hear you play. You have a gift. It was the kind of sentence that felt both ordinary and extraordinary, like a door opening just a crack. The person thanked them, smiling politely, but inside, their mind raced. That tiny suggestion, so simple and gentle, planted a seed of possibility that could not be ignored. Days turned into evenings of careful contemplation. They moved around the apartment differently, seeing the piano not just as a companion but as a bridge to something unknown. Every day they practiced in ways they had not before. They experimented with melodies, tested rhythms, and allowed their emotions to seep more openly into the music. Sometimes their fingers trembled as they played, not with fear of the notes, but with the weight of imagining others listening. The apartment, once a sanctuary, became a rehearsal hall filled with anticipation. The challenge itself began to take shape, not as a dramatic moment, but in small, quiet steps. They filled out the registration for the showcase, staring at the form longer than necessary. The pen hovered over the paper, hesitant. Signing their name felt like an admission that they might actually perform, that they might step out of the safe walls and into a world where music was not just personal. The decision was made slowly, carefully, almost imperceptibly. But it marked the first real movement toward change. Preparation became a ritual. Each day after work, the person would sit at the piano and imagine the room full of people, each face turned toward them. The initial fear was strong. Every note seemed fragile, every pause heavy with possibility. But as days passed, the music began to grow stronger, bolder. They played with intention, letting the melodies breathe and expand, feeling their heart beating in rhythm with the keys. The piano, patient and steady, responded as it always had, offering comfort and guidance. Friends and neighbors noticed subtle changes. There was a new lightness in their step, a quiet determination that had not been there before. A neighbor passing by might hear a particularly lively tune and pause. Unsure if the music belonged to someone in the apartment, or if it had drifted from somewhere magical. The person barely noticed, too absorbed in refining each piece. Testing emotions and dynamics, learning to balance confidence with vulnerability. Each note became a small act of courage. Each chord a statement that they were ready to meet the unknown. Fear, however, never fully disappeared. The night before the event, the apartment felt unusually heavy. Thoughts of failure, embarrassment, and judgment crowded in. They imagined missteps, wrong notes, and awkward silences. Their hands shook slightly as they touched the keys, and for a moment doubt threatened to undo all the preparation. But even in that fear, a quiet resolve emerged. They realized that the music itself did not belong to anyone else. It had been theirs for years, born in private moments and nurtured patiently. If the music was honest, then no audience could take that away. The morning of the showcase arrived, crisp and bright. The person felt a mix of nerves and anticipation, a tension that made the world seem sharper, more vivid. The walk to the community center was slow, measured every step accompanied by thoughts of what might happen. They saw other participants, some warm with confidence, others jittery like themselves. Each person carried a story, a courage of their own, and suddenly the room did not feel quite as intimidating. It felt like a shared space. It's a temporary world where people came together to express what mattered to them as they waited backstage. The person rehearsed quietly in their mind, imagining the melody flowing smoothly, imagining the audience listening with openness. The piano they would play on was different, unfamiliar in its touch and tone. Their fingers hovered over the keys, seeking comfort in the known movements, feeling the shape of the instrument as if greeting an old friend. The room behind the curtain buzzed softly with chatter and movement, but they focused inward, tuning out the distractions and centering themselves on the music. When their turn arrived, a wave of fear surged, but it was quickly met by determination. Stepping onto the stage, they faced the piano and the audience, a sea of faces, expectant yet patient. The spotlight felt heavy, but it did not define them. They took a deep breath and placed their fingers on the keys. The first note rang out, clear and deliberate, filling the room with sound. It was not perfect, but it was honest. Each following note gained confidence. Each phrase flowed naturally and slowly. The music began to take over the fear. The audience was quiet at first, unsure what to expect. But as the melody unfolded, their expressions softened, attention sharpened, and the atmosphere shifted. The person could feel the room listening, but not judging. The music connected with something universal, something unspoken yet deeply felt. Every chord, every gentle pause, carried the years of practice, the moments of solitude. The courage to step forward despite fear. The person realized that the challenge had already been met. By simply sitting down and letting the music speak, time seemed to blur. The notes rose and fell, creating a world that belonged only to the piano and the performer. When the final chord faded, the room stayed quiet for a heartbeat, as if savoring the sound that lingered in the air. Then, a small applause began, growing steadily as the audience recognized the courage, skill, and the beauty of the music. It was not thunderous, not loud or demanding attention, but it was real, and it mattered. Backstage, the person exhaled, a mixture of relief and exhilaration washing over them. The fear that had seemed so strong moments ago had been transformed by action, by bravery, by the simple decision to face the challenge. They realized that the event was not just about performing, but about discovering the depth of their own courage, about understanding that a quiet life could still hold extraordinary moments that day. The person learned that challenges were not only tests of skill, but opportunities for growth. The piano had been a companion, a secret friend, and now it was a bridge to the world, showing that even ordinary people could create moments that mattered. The experience left them changed, not dramatically, but deeply. With a quiet confidence that would carry forward into the music and into life itself, the moment the person's fingers touched the keys, a hush fell over the room. The first note rang out, soft yet steady, like a small spark igniting a hidden flame. They hesitated for just a fraction of a second, as if testing whether the room would listen, whether the music could reach beyond the stage. Then the next note followed, more confident, and another after that. Slowly, the melody began to flow, tentative at first, then gathering strength with each phrase. The audience watched quietly. Some leaned forward in their chairs, unsure what to expect. Others closed their eyes, letting the sound enter without judgment. It was not just a performance. It was a moment of honesty, an offering of something deeply personal. The person felt their heart beat in rhythm with the piano, each note carrying years of practice, quiet mornings, and late nights spent alone in the apartment. This was more than music. It was a conversation with the world they had kept at a distance for so long. As the melody grew, so did the confidence in their fingers. Each movement was deliberate, each chord carefully shaped, yet the music retained a natural fluidity. It rose and fell like the gentle tide, pulling the listeners along with it. Some faces softened, emotions appearing in expressions that the person could not see fully, but could sense in the way the room seemed to breathe with the music. The piano, once a private friend, had become a voice reaching outward, touching lives without words. The person had imagined this moment countless times, but reality felt different. The energy in the room was tangible, a mix of curiosity, attentiveness, and quiet awe. They felt the weight of it, but did not let it overwhelm them. Instead, they let the music guide their hands, letting emotion shape the notes instead of fear. Every pause was meaningful, every rise in tone deliberate. The melody carried fragments of their life moments of joy, sorrow, hope, and longing, all woven seamlessly into a story told through sound. Some in the audience shifted, leaning closer to hear better, sensing the depth in each phrase. A parent held a child's hand, both captivated, though neither could articulate exactly why. A young man with headphones around his neck sat quietly, letting the sound penetrate, and a woman near the back wiped a tear without drawing attention. The music had begun to break barriers, reaching into spaces where words could not. For the performer, the experience was both terrifying and exhilarating. Their thoughts faded as they played, leaving only the connection between fingers, keys, and the story the music demanded. The piano responded as it always had, steady and patient, its worn keys giving life to each note. The person realized that the instrument was more than wood and strings. It was an extension of themselves, a channel for emotions that could not otherwise be expressed. Every note was a bridge between their inner world and the audience, a message delivered in sound instead of speech. The melody changed, becoming more dynamic, exploring contrasts between soft, delicate passages and powerful resonant chords. The room seemed to respond, each person adjusting to the ebb and flow of the music. There were no distractions, no phones, no side conversations, just a shared presence. A collective breath held in the quiet anticipation of what would come next. The performer could feel the tension release, the connection deepen. It was a dialogue without words. The person had never felt more alive. As the piece progressed, the audience began to recognize the courage it took to perform. They could sense the years of private practice, the quiet moments of struggle, the personal fears that had been overcome to sit here, on this stage in front of them. The music itself carried authenticity, and authenticity has a way of reaching hearts instantly. Some faces reflected wonder, some reflected empathy, and others simply a quiet appreciation for the beauty unfolding before them. The performer's mind, which had been racing with self-doubt, grew calm. The music had taken control, guiding their fingers with an ease that felt like magic. They no longer thought about mistakes or judgment. They only listened to the sound, responded to the rhythm, and allowed the piano to speak. Each chord resonated with confidence. Each melody carried vulnerability, creating a balance that drew listeners closer without them even realizing it. Time became fluid. What might have been 3 or 4 minutes felt like an eternity and an instant all at once. The performer's emotions wove into the music, turning simple notes into something deeper. Memories, dreams, small joys, and quiet sorrows were all there, hidden within the phrasing and the pauses. It was a story told without a single word, yet understood by all who listened. The audience felt it in their hearts, connection that did not require explanation. By the middle of the performance, the room seemed to breathe with the music. A soft smile appeared on one listener's face. A tear slipped silently down another's cheek, and yet another nodded subtly, caught in the rhythm and beauty of the melody. Each person was experiencing the music uniquely, yet all were united in their attention and feeling. The performer felt a profound sense of responsibility and honor. They realized that this moment, fragile and fleeting, carried the potential to touch people in ways nothing else could. The performer's body relaxed as the piece reached its climax. The melodies intertwined, rising and falling with emotional intensity, drawing everyone into a shared experience. It was not flashy or extravagant, but deeply moving. The piano, though old and imperfect, sang with a richness that could only come from patience, care, and heartfelt intention. The room was silent except for the sound, a perfect canvas for the music to paint its story. As the final notes approached, the performer slowed, letting the melody linger. Each chord was deliberate, resonant, carrying the weight of the journey that had brought them here. The last key was pressed, held just long enough to let the sound settle, and then silence returned. For a heartbeat, there was nothing but stillness, as if the world itself paused to acknowledge the moment. Then slowly whispers began, soft expressions of awe, admiration, and wonder. The applause started quietly, then grew steadily, filling the room. The performer's heart swelled with emotion, a mix of relief, joy, and humility. They realized that the music had transcended fear, doubt, and hesitation, becoming something that could connect, move, and inspire. Faces in the audience reflected appreciation and respect, but more than that, they reflected recognition. Recognition of courage, authenticity, and the power of sharing one's truth. The performer took a small bow, feeling the warmth of acknowledgement without letting it overwhelm them. The piano, patiently standing by, had played its part beautifully. It had been a partner, a guide, and a voice that could carry feelings too complex for words. In that moment, the performer understood that the true reward was not applause or recognition, but the realization that they had faced fear and created something meaningful. They had opened a door, both for themselves and for the audience, to experience something real backstage after the performance. The performer's hand shook slightly, not from nerves, but from the release of emotions long held in check. They felt a mixture of pride and humility, knowing that the moment had been shared honestly and fully. Conversations with other participants, smiles from strangers, and quiet congratulations from organizers all reinforced the realization that stepping forward, embracing the challenge, and trusting their music had been the right choice. The experience left the performer changed in subtle but profound ways. Confidence grew not from the applause itself, but from the knowledge that they had allowed the music to speak freely, that they had faced vulnerability without regret. The piano, old and familiar, had proven once again that patience, care, and dedication can create moments that are larger than fear or doubt. And the performer knew that this was only the beginning. The first notes played had opened a path to something greater, a journey that would continue to unfold with each key, each melody, and each choice to step forward. The performer's hands moved with a quiet certainty, each finger finding the keys as if they had known this moment all their life. The room seemed to lean in, listening, drawn into the unfolding story with every note. The melody had grown stronger, more intricate, carrying emotions that words could never express. There was a depth now that had not been present in the first moments, a richness that came from years of private practice and quiet longing, now poured openly into the air. Every chord seemed to resonate beyond the room, touching hearts in ways that were invisible but undeniable. The audience no longer watched from a distance. They felt part of the music itself, drawn into a shared experience that bridged the gap between performer and listener. Some eyes glistened with tears, others shone with wonder, and still others simply reflected quiet awe. The music had become a living thing, a presence that belonged to no one but two. Everyone at the same time. The performer had long learned that the piano was more than an instrument. It was a voice, a companion, a confidant. And tonight, it was a bridge. Each note spoken into the room was an invitation to connect, to listen, to feel. The melody swelled and softened, rose and fell, tracing the contours of joy, sorrow, and hope. The performer could feel the energy in the room, the shared heartbeat of the audience, each person silently acknowledging the courage and vulnerability that had brought them here. A small child, sitting near the front, leaned forward, captivated. The child's hand reached instinctively to touch their own heart, as if to keep pace with the rhythm that seemed to echo within them. An elderly man at the back, who had entered skeptical, now closed his eyes, letting memories surface. Memories he had tucked away and almost forgotten. Each listener experienced the music differently, yet the connection was undeniable. It was personal, intimate, universal all at once. The performer's thoughts had disappeared entirely, replaced by focus and feeling. There was no room for doubt or distraction. Only the music existed. They felt themselves moving as part of the instrument, a single unit with the piano, the worn keys, the gentle resistance of each chord. The resonance of the strings all combined to give life to the story the performer had carried inside for so long. It was a story of patience, persistence, and quiet courage finally brought into the light. The melody now took on a new intensity. It flowed with a sense of urgency, a passionate plea, but balanced with tenderness. Each phrase was deliberate, each pause intentional. The performer let emotions guide their hands, trusting the music to convey what they could not speak aloud. There was a vulnerability in the performance, a raw honesty that was impossible to ignore. The audience could sense it. They leaned forward unconsciously, as if drawn by an invisible thread. Moved by the purity of expression, some began to whisper softly to one another, commenting on the beauty, on the feeling, on how unexpected it was to witness something so deeply moving from someone who had seemed ordinary moments ago. Others simply sat silently, overwhelmed by the weight and grace of the music. It was a shared recognition of the power of human expression, a collective acknowledgement that the performer had offered something truly rare and precious. The climax approached gradually, not with sudden flourish, but with steady growth. The music became more complex, intertwining notes and chords with a seamless grace that spoke of skill and intuition. The performer's fingers moved swiftly, yet with care, each touch intentional. The room seemed to vibrate with the energy of the sound, each listener drawn further into the experience, feeling the music as something alive, something that transcended the ordinary. Tears appeared on several faces, unspoken, unshared, yet profoundly understood. The performer noticed the subtle reactions, though not consciously, and let them guide the intensity. The music was not about applause or recognition. It was about connection, about sharing a piece of the soul that had been nurtured in solitude for so long. It was a gift, delicate and unassuming, yet powerful enough to leave a lasting mark on all who experienced it. As the final passages approached, the music softened, becoming more reflective, almost like a sigh. A gentle release of tension and emotion. The performer slowed, allowing each note to linger, each chord to breathe. The audience responded instinctively, leaning back, closing eyes, taking in the final moments with reverence. It was a moment of collective understanding, a silent acknowledgement of the courage and artistry on display. The last note was struck with perfect timing, the sound resonating through the room before fading into stillness. For a brief heartbeat, silence reigned, heavy with emotion. Then, slowly, a murmur began, growing into applause. It started quietly, hesitant at first, then grew steadily as the audience expressed their appreciation, their awe, and their admiration. Some stood, some clapped with vigor, others wiped tears, all united in recognition of the extraordinary experience they had just witnessed. The performer bowed slightly, feeling a rush of gratitude and relief. The fear that had seemed so overwhelming just hours ago had been transformed into something beautiful, something shared. They realized that the moment had been bigger than any individual concern, bigger than self-doubt or hesitation. It was a reminder that courage, honesty, and persistence could create moments that touched others in ways nothing else could. Backstage, after stepping away from the piano, the performer's hands trembled slightly, a mixture of release and exhilaration. They felt the weight of the experience, the significance of sharing something deeply personal and having it acknowledged without pretense or judgment. The applause had been loud, the admiration evident, but the real change was internal. Confidence, humility, and an understanding of their own strength had grown quietly, unobserved. Like the roots of a tree deep beneath the surface, friends and participants approached, offering congratulations, smiles, and kind words. Each interaction was gentle, heartfelt, confirming that the music had created genuine connection. The performer responded with quiet gratitude, understanding that this was not about recognition alone, but about sharing an authentic part of themselves and witnessing the impact of that honesty. It was a moment of transformation, subtle but powerful, and it would remain with them long after the final applause had faded. The experience revealed something profound, that a single performance, a single act of bravery could ripple outward, touching lives in ways that were not immediately visible. The music had reached beyond the notes and chords, into the hearts of those listening, leaving impressions that would linger in memory. And for the performer, the realization was even more personal. They had faced fear, embraced vulnerability, and allowed their truth to be seen, and in doing so, had created a moment that would forever be a part of who they were. That night, as they returned home, the apartment felt different. The piano, once a private companion, seemed to hold even more significance, a witness to courage and a partner in creation. The air was still, yet charged with possibility. The performer knew that life had shifted, subtly but meaningfully. The challenge had been met, the fear transformed, and the music had spoken in a way that transcended words. It was a quiet revolution, an affirmation that even ordinary lives, lived with honesty and courage, could create extraordinary moments. The days following the performance were quiet but charged with a new sense of possibility. The performer returned to their routine, but life felt subtly different. The piano, once a private sanctuary, now held an added layer of significance. It had been part of a moment that touched others, a bridge from solitude to connection. Each time their fingers brushed the keys, They remembered the faces in the audience, the warmth in their expressions, the quiet acknowledgement of something extraordinary shared. Word of the performance began to spread, slowly at first. Friends who had attended spoke to others, describing the depth and emotion of the music. People mentioned how moving it was, how unexpected, how it seemed to carry a truth that resonated deeply. The performer received gentle messages of appreciation, small notes that reflected gratitude and wonder. None of it was boastful or overwhelming, but each word was a quiet affirmation that the courage to step forward had mattered. Yet, despite the recognition, the performer remained grounded. They understood that the applause and attention, while meaningful, were not the essence of what had happened. The real reward was internal, in the understanding of their own courage, resilience, and capacity to express something deeply personal. They reflected on the journey that had brought them here. Years of private practice, quiet mornings, late nights of experimentation and patience, and the choice to face fear when the opportunity arose. Each element had contributed to the moment, yet none of it could have been predicted or forced. It had to be lived and experienced. Neighbors and colleagues began to notice subtle changes in the performer as well. There was a newfound ease in their presence, a quiet confidence that came not from vanity but from self-trust. Smiles were more frequent, gestures more assured, and there was a warmth in interactions that suggested something had shifted beneath the surface. The person still carried the same humility, but it was accompanied by a sense of strength that had been tempered in the crucible of the performance. Back at the piano, the performer explored new melodies with a sense of freedom and curiosity. Each note felt lighter, more expansive, as if the experience of sharing music had opened doors to uncharted creative possibilities. The apartment, once a private refuge, had become a studio of discovery, where the performer could experiment without fear, knowing that music had power far beyond personal boundaries. Compositions took on new depth, inspired not just by solitude, but by the connection forged with the audience, a reminder that sharing art can amplify its meaning. They occasionally visited the community center again, observing events or quietly listening to others perform. There was a sense of kinship with the participants, a recognition of shared courage. Everyone who stepped on stage carried their own fears, hopes, and stories, and the performer understood intimately the vulnerability of such moments. Sometimes they offered gentle encouragement, sometimes silent acknowledgement, but always with empathy. Knowing how transformative it could be to have one's expressions seen and heard, the performer also reflected on the ripple effects beyond the music itself. Friends spoke of inspiration, mentioning how they felt encouraged to pursue their own passions or overcome personal hesitations. Strangers who had witnessed the performance shared stories of emotional resonance, how the music had stirred memories or sparked courage in moments of quiet struggle. The performer realized that a single act, grounded in authenticity, could radiate far wider than anticipated, touching lives in subtle, unseen ways. Despite the growing attention, the performer remained humble. They understood that this was not the end of a journey, but a continuation. Each day offered opportunities to explore, create, and connect. The music that had once existed solely for themselves now had the potential to reach further, and the performer felt a sense of responsibility to honor that gift, not with showiness, but with sincerity and care. It was a balance between private joy and public sharing, a careful stewardship of something precious. Time moved on, but the memory of that performance stayed vivid. It became a reference point for courage, a reminder of what was possible when one faced fear and acted despite it. Whenever uncertainty arose, the performer thought back to the moment of first notes, the hush of the audience, the way music had created a bridge between private emotion and public experience. It was a touchstone for confidence, a guide for future choices, and a proof that bravery, however quiet or small it might seem, could create profound impact. The performer continued to play daily, sometimes alone, sometimes for small gatherings of friends or local events. Each performance carried traces of that first shared moment, a blend of technical skill and heartfelt emotion honed over years. But each time there was also something new, a discovery, a reflection of growth. The music evolved, yet its core remained the same, honest, intentional, and deeply personal. The audience, when present, felt this authenticity, often responding not with extravagant applause, but with quiet attention, reflective smiles, or emotional nods. The performer learned to cherish these responses as much as any overt recognition, understanding that true impact is often subtle and enduring. Reflecting further, the performer realized that the significance of the moment was not only in the audience's reaction, but in the internal transformation it had triggered. Fear no longer had the same hold, self-doubt had softened, and the capacity to act despite uncertainty had grown. There was a sense of empowerment that extended beyond music into everyday life. Decisions felt lighter, actions more deliberate, and even the quiet moments of solitude carried an enhanced richness, colored by the memory of having stepped forward, faced vulnerability, and experienced meaningful connection. In the weeks and months that followed, invitations to play occasionally appeared, small opportunities that allowed the performer to share music further. Each offer was approached with careful thought. Never for fame, never for validation, but for the joy of connecting through music. Each performance was an act of courage, an embrace of opportunity, a continuation of the journey begun with the first shared notes. The performer approached each with humility, curiosity, and respect for both the audience and the music itself. The performer's life, though still rooted in quiet routines and simple pleasures, now had an added dimension. Music had become both a personal refuge and a bridge to the world. Each key pressed, each melody played, was informed by the memory of that pivotal performance. The knowledge that private passion could touch lives in ways previously unimaginable. The piano, old and worn, remained a constant companion. Its presence a reminder of patience, practice, and the enduring power of authentic expression. Ultimately, the performer understood that true impact comes not from recognition alone, but from authenticity, courage, and willingness to share oneself despite fear. A single act of bravery, combined with years of quiet dedication, could create ripples far,